Hey, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, ATARC, second webinar today in our series supporting this year's Insider Threat theme, our Insider Threat theme of Deter, Detect, and Mitigate. Hey, today we're going to focus on detection. Hey, I'm Mike Cutson, the Vice President for Insider Threat and Suicide Prevention at a Virginia-based company called ClearForce, where we focus on privacy compliance and human risk signals. Hey, my background is law enforcement and 30 years in the Marine Corps, working counterterrorism and counterintelligence. Hey, ATARC is supported today by two subject matter experts around insider threat. Before I ask them to introduce themselves, hey, some quick rules of engagement as we get started. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the ATARC YouTube page shortly after we finish up here today. Additionally, we'll be attaching the most recent bulletin from the Department of Defense Insider Threat Management Analysis Center, or the DITMAC, specifically from the group here today, the Behavior Threat Analysis Center, or the BTAC, on moral outrage. Today we're going to lean into the challenge of detection around this topic. Hey, the second, please use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. We're going to try to get to those today during this 30-minute session. But if we can't, we'll be sure to get back to you with some answers to your questions. Hey, last, going into the chat function right now, you all should be able to access, are a few of the definitions that will help us on our initial conversation. Okay, with that behind us, hey, I'm super motivated today to have Kurt and Pete on with us. And Kurt, we're going to start with you first to go through an introduction, and then I'm going to toss it over to Pete for one. And then it would be really interesting if the two of you would spend maybe a minute or two kind of on the roles and missions of the BTAC, and maybe a little bit about your bulletins in general. Over to you, Kurt.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Kurt Kennedy. I'm working with Pete Lapp over in the DITMAC BTAC, and in a moment, Pete will tell you a little bit more about what that's all about. I have over 30 years as a licensed clinical psychologist supporting a wide variety of government and contract missions having to do with assessment and selection for positions in high risk, high gain jobs, as well as direct consulting on a wide variety of government related law enforcement investigations, as well as operational activities connected with intelligence operations and so forth. So over the years, I've had the privilege of working in different locations within the government, both within Department of Defense and outside, including my last 11 years at the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, where I supported agents who were consulting on cases from a behavioral analysis perspective. So continuing now in retirement as a contractor with DITMAC BTAC, and over to you, Pete, to introduce yourself and tell them a little bit more.
Thanks, Kirk. Pete Lapp, I'm a senior threat manager at the BTAC. I'm going to give you, DoD has a ton of acronyms. Let me drill these down for you. The Behavioral Threat Analysis Center, which is a part of the DITMAC, DoD's Insider Threat Management Assessment Center, Analysis Center. We are part of DCSA. DITMAC was set up after the Navy Yard shooting. BTAC has been around for a little while, maybe 3 or 4 years. I'm one of 3 senior threat managers. I was at the FBI for 22 years as an agent, working mostly counterintelligence and espionage. I'm very happy to be on contract and working with BTAC and DITMAC, working on insider threat cases. We get through our process cases from all the DoD insider threat hubs, of which I think there are almost 44 of them. And we provide, the BTAC provides us the analysis and consultations of threat mitigation, threat management, of how do we deal with the different threats that come into DoD that the insider threat hubs are seeing. We are a multidisciplinary team. So we've got behavioral scientists, of which we have 7 PhDs, 7. I mean, that's how cool we are. 3 threat managers, 3 law enforcement counterintelligence folks. We've got employee relations experts and cyber experts. And last but not least, our bulletin. We produce a bulletin once a month called the BTAC bulletin. And I know our colleagues at ATARC are gonna put a link in. We have live PhDs standing by right now to add your name to our distro list. I wanted to do that in my best infomercial voice, but trying to add you to the bulletin list so that we can get that information out to you. Every month we provide some kind of topic, writing it at the graduate level, and you're welcome to receive those and share them more fully with your organizations. But happy to be on this call to talk about crisis of consciousness.
Hey, that's awesome. And too, great to have you both on the team. And by the way, as a little shout out, Pete, really enjoyed your book there on the Queen of Cuba. I thought that was well done. Hey, so yeah, since that was my best, what do you say it, marketing voice. But hey, so let's dive in. Moral outrage. I mean, that's the June bulletin. And that really put us on this conversation today after that came out. And we at the ATARC Insider Threat Working Group really kind of took a look at that and thought, you know what, we should be sharing or engaging your team in this conversation for both insider threat managers, even HR managers. I know we have players on the call today that aren't just purely security and insider threat professionals. So with that as a backdrop, this question over to you both. We'd be interested in to discuss this idea of crisis of conscience and how it could lead to the moral outrage. And really spend that minute, if you don't mind, what is a crisis of conscience? And again, how should organizations be thinking about that? So maybe Pete, we'll start with you, and we'll go over to Kirk.
No, Kirk first, please.
Kirk first. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
It's all good.
so it's a great question, Mike, and in a minute, Pete can weigh in as well. But basically, thanks to our hosts for putting in the definitions here, so you can read that for yourself. But basically, we are seeing multiple situations where people become so outraged that they can behave in both pro-social and criminal ways, including violence towards others, violence towards themselves. And there's several different ways that people become morally outraged. One of them is when they can develop a crisis of conscience, where there's a conflict between one's personal moral code and the policies or the operational goals of a U.S. government or military entity that they work for, or you'll see people in the general public feeling a crisis of conscience when they're considering the current policy of the U.S. government towards other nations or what have you. So there's several different ways that people become morally outraged. One that we won't talk about, don't have time to talk about too much today, and that's moral injury. We're seeing this a lot in the military, where fully 90% of military members who develop post-traumatic stress disorder have at least one symptom of moral injury, where they feel like their own personal moral code was violated by either their command or a colleague in the field. And so that's another path that we've seen people develop moral outrage from. But today we're going to restrict the conversation to crisis of conscience and how it develops into moral outrage. So over to you, Pete, to provide additional commentary.
To me, it's not a new phenomenon, but I think maybe it's growing. You know, I look back. My area of interest is the espionage and unauthorized disclosure world. And you think back to Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers, and where he found out this information. He was morally outraged. It caused him to a call to action. And then he disclosed classified information to the public. Whether that was a good or bad thing can have debate. I talk about him and start with him because he becomes the basis of the inspiration for Snowden and Manning and Reality Winner. Daniel Hale, ironically, who's a relative of the great Nathaniel Hale, you know, one of the from back in the Revolutionary War. Ana Montes and a lot of these individuals who have this moral outrage and aren't able to just let it fester, but have a call to action on top of that that makes them do maladaptive behavior. And that's where I think the key to this is, there's no individual, whether they're an American citizen, whether they have a clearance, whether they work as a presidential appointee, that will fully have um, a belief in whatever policy is out there, or whatever program, or whatever philosophy there is. But it's, how do we deal with that? Do we deal with that in healthy ways, or maladaptive ways? And that's the key, I think, to the course of the conversation here, in making sure that insider threat programs are postured to at least be looking for it, or see, being able to see it if it's occurring, and assessing whether that's something that needs to be mitigated or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because as you're talking, both Kurt and Pete, where I'm going to is the Dr. Shaw critical pathway. So the idea of this focus in that chain of events: deter, detect, and to mitigate. But it seems like we have tools people think through. I can detect user activity monitoring. I can detect, data loss. I have the ability to pick up on external data signals like financial pressure, legal pressure, criminal pressure. They seem to make, I don't want to say binary, but they seem to lead to, how would we think, or how could organizations start to think about, to detect or discover this idea of this building moral outrage? Because I think some people could have it and be totally under a great deal of pressure and just march on, where others, as you articulated, they go off the rails. Kurt, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen many examples beyond what Pete had just mentioned about this, where um, people just went off the rails, to use your terminology there, Mike. Like um, in recent months, we saw a case where this Air Force member, Airman Bushnell, lit himself on fire to kill himself in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., because he felt outraged at what he called the genocide of Palestinians, and the moral outrage that he felt about it led to his own um, death. And that is just extremely sad. And then the question becomes, for today, how do we detect these things so that we can deter them off of a pathway towards violence or any other maladaptive behavior? I mean, uh, we want to uh, learn from past cases. One thing we learned, for example, from the Major Nidal Hassan case is that he was expressing his moral outrage in the workplace. He was giving briefings to Army personnel in which he was broadcasting his own outrage over the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He was actually about to deploy to Afghanistan himself, and he had on his business card SOG under his name, or Soldier of God. So he was broadcasting his commitment to a radical viewpoint. And that is one area where you will see people in your workplaces. They will engage in law enforcement parlance, leakage of intent to do something that's against everyone's laws and moral codes, doing violence toward other people. And so, how do you detect that? It's not going to be as obvious all the time as it was in the Nadal case, but you'll hear people being a little more expressive of their anti-government views. And it's up to supervisors to engage people in conversations to see if this is just normal, acceptable expression of First Amendment rights, or if it's heading towards some maladaptive behavior that you want to give them an off-ramp from. So I'll stop there and flip it over to Pete for further commentary.
I think step one is to make sure our insider threat programs are leaning into this because it is delicate. It does have the potential of inflaming or getting towards political sensitivities. I think that we've got to, as insider threat professionals, really take a leadership role in this and talk to our employees and workforce about this concept. Technology is phenomenal, and where we're at today versus where we were in the 90s and 2000 and insider threat is light years away. But technology to me is a means to an end. The ambassadors of our insider threat programs is the workforce, and therefore, are you talking to them about moral outrage and these policy disagreements and understanding, sensitizing them on what to look for? It's just like regular insider threat. Okay. It's not just one potential risk indicator. I can't stand this policy. That in and of itself doesn't mean that someone's going to commit an unauthorized disclosure, commit espionage, or be a targeted violence actor. There's other PRIs that would be combining, clustered in with that would go into that moral outrage. But I think our programs need to be leaning in and talking to our employees, and then making sure that our technology is tuned in to make sure that it's seeing these indicators that it potentially could be seeing in chats or emails or whatever technology forms you're using.
Yeah, I'm going to peel that back one bit because I think I agree. You're talking about leakage. You're talking about how that might manifest. But when you think of leakage, what comes to my mind as an insider threat person, I think people on the call, where should I focus my sensors? And then what sensors would be the most advantageous ones to kind of take a look? What's coming through my mind, I know, Kirk, you hit on a couple, but interested in your thoughts around social media. I know the government is working through that. I think it's Security Executive Directive 5. I think SEED 5 is the social media one. But I'd also be interested to pull a string, Pete, and both of y'all on the idea of see something, say something, and how insider threat professionals should be thinking about how do I include social media? What's that look like? How do I include internal reporting? What's that look like against maybe the critical pathway? So, Kurt, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the human engagement piece is the most important part of that. And in a moment, Pete can talk more about that, as well as kind of our multidisciplinary approach. Because one of the things that you'll see in any technology-based sentiment analysis or sentiment detection or leakage detection program is a lot of false positives where people are expressing viewpoints, but they're not really going to do anything maladaptive about it. Okay. And so that's where just being able to appreciate the full context of somebody's behavior is critically important. And so, Pete, I know you have some additional thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, I think that there's, like, for example, there's a recent political appointee that worked at the State Department in the Biden administration, who was a political appointee under Biden, who resigned and stepped down and said, I can't do this anymore, in response to this policy, the current administration's policy vis-a-vis Israel and Gaza. So I think that it's not reasonable for us to assume that our employees' views always align with our organizations. And in that case, it was a political appointee that had that. In terms of where I think sensitizing the workforce, the see something, say something is a bumper sticker. It's cliche almost at this point in time. Are we talking to our employees about understanding what's reasonable and what's beyond, what's something that we should be concerned about? I had a case in a previous life, not in this job, where an individual, I went and talked to an insider threat. I was the insider threat program manager, and I talked to a group of executive assistants and said, this is what I'm looking for. Let me know if you see anything. And it had to do with QAnon. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, I got a call saying, hey, I heard what you said. I am aware of this. I want you to know about it. I don't know what to do with this. And at the end, we mitigated the risk. The individual was counseled. It was, all was fine, but just having that confidence and letting them know what to look for. We assessed the concern, managed it in a responsible way, I think, and the employee was continued on in their career, and then we moved on to the next issue. I think those are kind of vignettes, if you will, of a positive way of dealing with moral outrage, and this topic, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I'm totally tracking that. I think that's good. Hey, I want to go maybe a little lower on that multidisciplinary team comment that because I think that's part of the power of what you do at the BTAC. And maybe this would be a really good opportunity. I know you mentioned it on the front end. How can insider threat programs, how can outside agencies, potentially non-government, but maybe in organizations like cleared contractors, how can they leverage some of that? So maybe first a little bit more on that whole multidisciplinary, Kurt, and then anything you can, Pete, on how what you all do can potentially support all of us on the outside. So, Kurt, what are your thoughts?
So Pete mentioned a little bit earlier our multidisciplinary team in the BTAC, and it's been a wonderful experience because not every subdiscipline weighs in on every insider threat case. So we have threat managers like Pete, we have law enforcement and counterintelligence experts, we have cyber experts, we have human relations experts, and then of course we have the behavioral science piece, as Pete mentioned before. And what's very interesting is that we all have different experiences and perspectives and training and different backgrounds, right? And it's just been a very robust um, collaboration, if you will, to coalesce all of our thoughts together in something that's actionable as we send it back out to the field with recommendations for further mitigation beyond what they've already done to deal with the case. And so, Pete, I'll turn it over to you for further comment.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. I think that one of the positive dynamics of our MDT multi-discipline team is the psychologist. I think it's our secret weapon. We're able to, all of us are able to, because at any point in time where there's 5 different people from 5 different disciplines looking at one case, and we're able to, because we have a relationship that we get along, everyone's collaborative, we can check our biases because each of us bring a bias into a certain situation. Some of us think that certain people wear tinfoil hats, and others can say, think about it this way. So it gives us an opportunity to really make sure that our biases are not brought into the threat management and solution. And I think that's really important. I think that our secret weapon really is the 7 PhDs that we have. If you do not have a behavioral science capability in your insider threat programs, you are not even close to being mature. And I'll give you a hypothetical example. Let's say someone's been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And we're sitting there as laymen going, well, antisocial means I'm the guy at the bar who's in the corner at the party in the corner with a glass of wine looking down at his shoes. No. That's not what antisocial means. When you combine that with narcissism, this is what it could really relate to. And having that behavioral scientist who's either on staff or on retainer or on call to help you with that, because we talk about the Bushnell case. There's no way that individual did not have a mental health history that was of concern, and our behavioral scientists can really help enrich the threat assessment live if we've got the right people in place.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. But hey, we got a really good question that came in the from the audience here, and I'd like to just read it to you here. So I apologize if I'm reading it directly, but it says, any studies done on how to define the guidelines for work behavior and related boundaries where there is a high risk of violence or other damage, example, leaking secrets, etc., and related education on how to manage that positively. So, Kirk, any thoughts on that?
So when you're talking about studies, there's a whole incredibly rich set of studies conducted within the realm of criminology and sociology in academic institutions across the country. I will point you to ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, of which I'm a member. And there are free publications available to address how to set up work-related boundaries, which is the crux of this question. Because if you can set up your policy stance so that people know what the right and left limits are in terms of what behavior is permitted and what's out of bounds in the workplace, I think you're in a really good position. I have really been erring on the side of pounding the drum that we need to do a better job of training our supervisors to have positive conversations on a regular basis with everyone who reports to them, because you'll be able to appreciate someone's baseline of behavior and any shift off of that might suggest the possibility that things might go awry with this person, and to leverage help resources, whether that's, through counseling or through the chaplaincy or some other supportive mechanism to help this person deal with either their crisis of conscience or some other issue. For many people, we know from a litany of espionage cases that it was financial motivations. Since 9/11, it's become a different story, with people with multiple cultural identities and conflicted loyalties that come into play as well. So I'll stop there and kick it over to Pete for further commentary.
Yeah, to that question, I think, the last thing an organization wants to be deemed is a maladaptive organizational response. And unfortunately, there have been too many of those that can be categorized as that. To Kirk, your point, and I think we have to recognize that there are people that are coming to a U.S. government agency perhaps to do bad things. There was a recent case 2 years ago in Colorado Springs with NSA, where a guy 3 months in called the Russian embassy and said, "Hey, I want to volunteer. I'm really angry about what's going on in Ukraine, and I could use $75,000." Now, what motivation is 1A and 1B? Who knows? But this guy went into NSA with malintent. There's no way 3 months in he was that angry with the organization. He couldn't even find his parking spot after 3 months. So I think that that's really important to focus in on, that there are people that go to government to do wrong things. And I think we as the government organizations need to think about how do we not be maladaptive, but to that question. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, I think that was, and I wish we could go longer. We've got like 90 seconds left on this session, but I would, Pete, Kirk, really in a speed round, if you have any like last minute best thoughts, best practices, Kirk, go first. Just toss it out for the group. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to double tap on the multidisciplinary piece. It makes all the difference to see things from different angles and perspectives. And the second point is consider the context in which the behavior is occurring. Pete?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to lean in and talk about this topic. Use our bulletin as a discussion starting point, and again, get behavioral scientists on your team somehow, some way.
No, I think that's good. And again, I've seen a couple more questions come flying in. We unfortunately just won't get a chance to get to all of them. Hey, this is a really good for everybody on the call. We wanted to, the ATARC Insider Threat Team wanted to talk more than just looking at what we would consider a tool solution set. This is more going to get you to think about, and I think we heard from Kurt and Pete today, organizationally thinking about that moral outrage. What is that? And we saw great examples of insider threats that weren't directly tied to your traditional ones, like, well, this guy has a crime problem or has a legal issue or a financial need. I think, Pete, your last statement tying the two together was exactly right. So really do appreciate everybody's time on the call today. So thank you both for joining again. We put in the chat the way to reach out to the BTAC. You're going to see an opportunity to sign up for that bulletin. Someone who's been in this space for quite some time. I think those are super valuable and really spot on as a way to kind of rebalance or think through your program. And as Ashley, as insider threat professionals, specifically, you're the senior officer, you got to do training, annual training. these become great little vignettes that you can introduce into your training to keep your insider threat program moving forward. So again, I do appreciate everybody's time, and ATARC appreciates everybody being here. And we will publish this shortly on our ATARC YouTube channel. And again, anybody interested in engaging with ATARC writ large, please log in, check out their website. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff, leading edge stuff. So really appreciate your time, everybody. Again, Pete, Kurt, thanks so much. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you.